We know the federal government, it sounds like, is interested in what it is that you say. Now let's talk about the federal government's role in what it is that you eat. It's been going on for several months now, a review of Canada's new food guide, which hasn't been updated in several years. You know, the old, you have to have this many fruits and veggies, this many meat and alternatives, this many dairy, this many that. And the new food guide is going to be dramatically different. It's not just tweaking it around with the numbers of how much of everything, but really adjusting the entire idea of what our food groups are themselves. And there has been a fair bit of criticism towards some of the experts that the committee overseeing this has brought in, people saying that they're approaching this from a place of ideology, not science. An open letter from a small number of Conservative MPs this week has called on the Liberals to bring the agricultural sector into the fold here, which, again, according to this release, has actually resulted in the Liberals shutting out the agriculture sector from the food review entirely. I want to welcome into the show here Bruce Sargent, who's a farm video producer. We've talked to him in the past. He's a member of a farming family and a great advocate for the farming community and issues connected to it. Bruce, it's good to talk to you again. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for the opportunity, Andrew. Always happy to talk.
So let's talk first off about where the actual agricultural sector has been left out here. Is it that they haven't had the chance to have a voice put in at all, or is it that the government just didn't listen to what the agricultural community was saying?
So, I mean, it's a bit of both, but at the end of the day, we as an industry, and it's not just dairy, it's agriculture all around, don't feel that we've been given the opportunity to present our science and our evidence that backs up the way the food guide is now. If the new food guide does go the way that they're explaining, it's going to completely ignore the 16 essential nutrients that are in milk and the Health Canada studies that show that it is a very vital part of Canadians' nutrition day to day.
You said those are Health Canada studies?
Yeah.
The government would already have those then, would it not?
Yeah, I think there may be a little bit of miscommunication between the different departments. But at the end of the day, this isn't about politics. This is about nutrition and feeding Canadians healthy food, and milk is one of those. There's also a lot going on about the fat content in milk. And so some people say that milk it has too much fat in it, but there's a difference between there's good fats and there's bad fats. And I saw a presentation by a cardiologist who's actually fighting the food guide as well. And he says that about 30% of our body weight is connected to the fats we consume. The other 70% is your lifestyle, is the other foods that you're eating, and even your ethnicity and your background. So you can't say that fat is bad, especially when you think about, there's different fat in milk than there is in potato chips. There's the difference between saturated fat and trans fat is very important here, because it's trans fats that are in some processed foods, and those aren't as healthy.
What you're saying makes perfect sense. I've seen a lot of science that has backed that up as well, but it stands to reason that anyone who has a financial interest in certain types of food, be they dairy or other food as well that's coming from livestock, is going to have a very skewed view of the science. Is that not the case?
Are you saying I'm a little biased because I'm a dairy farmer?
Well, I'm saying that any dairy farmer would obviously not want to be would obviously be putting forward evidence that says dairy is wonderful.
But at the same time, we have the plant-based argument saying that their food is better, and so they're in the same boat. But at the end of the day, you can't get the same quality of protein from a plant-based diet as you can from a diet with dairy, eggs, and meat. Your body just doesn't consume it the same way.
Are the experts and physicians that are putting forward their testimony, are there people that are connected with other groups or other movements, or are there people that are viewing this solely from a research perspective and they're putting forward what they've found are their conclusions?
There are loud voices that oppose plant protein as part of our diet, and I think they have probably gotten a good share of the voice right now, and now we just want to make sure that the dairy farmers and agriculture get our chance to share our side too.
Yeah, because I looked at a piece that was written in the Huffington Post, I think it was, when was it? Back in December, by a representative of Animal Justice, which, as the name would suggest, is a very pro-vegan, pro-animal rights group. And they're saying that the animal agriculture industry needs to be kept out of the food guide. And I would say, okay, if you're going to go that way, any voices like theirs need to be kept out as well. If we're going to make this a simply evidence-based process, I guess where I'm putting the question to you is, are there voices like that that are coming in from an ideological perspective against dairy or against meat that are getting equal footing or are getting a representation at this meeting?
Absolutely. There are people that will find nutritional evidence to back up an ideological claim, and that claim is that just by being involved in farming that we're abusing our animals, and that's just simply not true. Our animals are not abused. We take very good care of them, and that is honestly really harmful when people use that argument as a reason not to consume milk, because they don't know the level of care and effort that goes into farming.
Well, and it's so counterintuitive as well. I mean, the role of a committee is to sift through, in my view, all of the information and data. And that doesn't mean you accept at face value every bit of evidence that you're provided, but certainly more voices are better when it comes to things like this.
Absolutely. There's experts for a reason, and we just need to make sure that there's equal representation of doctors on both sides of the spectrum. And it's up to the government to decide what's best. But I think it's important to note that, yes, this food guide needs to be updated. It should reflect the cultural differences and the ethnical differences that have changed in Canada over the past 20 years, bring in some foods that weren't considered Canadian 20, 30 years ago. But it needs to be science-based, and it needs to be for the right reasons.
So what would you like to have happen here ultimately? I mean, who do you think needs to really be rallied behind as the spokesperson for the agriculture sector? Or do you really think it's a whole bunch of voices that we need to have at the table?
I think all of our agricultural marketing associations need to get a chance to share their nutritionist findings. So that means beef farmers, that means pork, that means egg, that means turkey, that means poultry, that means dairy. I think they all deserve equal time, and just as much time as the other side has gotten, really.
And this is where, whenever we've seen a government body that has done an investigative process like this, a committee process, they take forever, and you always get people all over the map that are approaching these. And in some cases, I look at these voices and I'd be like, okay, why on earth is that person being given a platform? But at the same time, I also think that that's preferable to them predetermining who has a right to speak out. And that really seems to be what's happening here.
So they did have a very open, almost social media-like consultation last summer where people could just leave their comments. But
like a newspaper comment section, basically.
Yeah, we saw a lot of trolls and a lot of bots and a lot of repetitive comments that all said the same thing. And that's not a true representation of the Canadian public. This needs to be a transparent, democratic approach, and it hopefully it can get there. You know, that's why we're having conversations like this, and we're still talking to our MPs. But we're also encouraging people to go to keepcanadianshealthy.ca, where they can send their MP and even the health minister a little note about, you know, keeping dairy and keeping animal protein in the food guide, because it's important to them. So I encourage anybody interested to take a look at that as well.
Yeah, and I know everyone likes to hold up science as the be-all and end-all, which I don't think is a negative. However, it's also important that we understand, especially with food science, there is a lot of back and forth that takes place in the scientific process. There are a lot of cases where one study is disputed by another. So you can't just say, okay, well, this doctor says this, therefore it's the gold standard of information.
Absolutely. The best thing that I see is meta-analysis, where this cardiologist that I saw in January, he compared 20 studies, and it showed, he had a graph showing, you know, which studies said that dairy was unhealthy and which studies said that dairy was healthy. And when you cancel them out, it's a perfect line up the middle in terms of balance on you know, which way you want to lean on it. So it needs to be more than one study. The studies need to be peer reviewed. All of those things that we look for in every other aspect of science is still important. But at the end of the day, we've been consuming dairy for 50 years, and there haven't been, these obesity issues that we're being accused of having. But it's frustrating when, loud voices can be heard, and a lot of times the farmers are the ones that get left out of the conversation, even though we're the ones making the food.
Bruce Sargent joining me on the line, a farm video producer, a member of a farming family himself. Bruce, thanks for coming on the show today. Great speaking again.
Thank you for your time, Andrew. I really
All the best to you,
appreciate it.
sir. When we come back in a couple of moments, more of the Andrew Lawton Show here on Global News Radio 980 CFPL.